Hey guys, my guest tonight, Jerry Kantor, is going to be talking about natural remedies and how we can use them to help with our health issues. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? Tuesday. We're getting closer to the weekend. 3 more days after today. You don't count today, right? Wednesday, Thursday, yeah. Anyway, my name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means we can get to you no matter where you live. You know, we might be an hour or two away from you, but we will definitely get to you. We also have branches of California Haunts, or versions of California Haunts in Washington, Oregon, Nevada, and Hawaii. So there you have it. You can find us everywhere. But if you do need something, you do need help with a haunting or what you think is a haunting, check us out on Facebook, because we are on Facebook, and we are also over on Twitter under Cal Haunts, and we are on Instagram under Ghosty Gal, and we are also on TikTok under California Haunts, which is all lowercase. So you can find us in quite a few places, and Twitch, because we're broadcasting on Twitch tonight as well. I want to welcome you all. We got a great show lined up for you. He confirmed just a few minutes ago he hasn't entered the room yet, so we can sit here and chat for a little bit. Jerry Kantor is going to be with us, I hope, when it's going tonight. He's going to be talking about natural remedies and things like that. And if not, you know what? We'll just read the book. It's fine. I'm good with it if you are. But I want to thank everybody for their support. We've been doing really good, and we're doing good this month. We're doing well. We're doing well this month as well. And I want to thank everybody for their support. If you're watching from Facebook, please be sure to hit that follow button. If you're watching from YouTube, there's a little ghost in the bottom right-hand corner with the magnifying glass and the Sherlock Holmes hat on, and that is our mascot. And that's how you subscribe. You can hit that subscribe button, and we've got more than 450 videos sitting over there. And those videos are of different topics. I'm a journalist. I'm a photojournalist. I like to change it up, just like tonight. We have a non-ghosty topic. We're going to be talking about health matters. Okay, I like to change things up. And the funny thing of it was, when I was working and not freelancing, I was actually the health reporter for one of the newspapers I worked for. Okay, so I have a little bit of knowledge about health issues as well, even though I've had my own health issues, right? So yeah, we're changing it up tonight just a bit. My guest tonight, and this is something that when I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, I had a great cardiologist, and real sweet, real good. And when I told her, it was funny because I was one of these people that was a fast food junkie. I still am a lot sometimes, but I worked as a newspaper reporter. You don't get a lot of time to sit down at a table and eat. You're usually on the run, because it's kind of like being a firefighter or a police officer. The minute you sit down to have a meal, boom, the phone rings and something's happened in town, so you got to take off. So a lot of your food is in the car, McDonald's, right? Because their regular burgers don't fall apart, right? So you're driving and So, of course, I ended up with congestive heart failure out of it all, and plus stress, but the junkie. And so when I told my cardiologist, I said, you know what? I'm done. I'm not eating more junk. I'm going on your low sodium diet. That's it. That's it for me. And then I told her, I said, I'm going to get some books. I'm going to get some books on Native American food, and start eating more naturally, and all this stuff's going on. And she was really good about it. Sometimes you'll find a doctor who's really cool about it. And she said, well, just show me the book you're using, because I just want to make sure it doesn't hurt your heart any further, and you can do it. So that's what I did. I went cold turkey. And then she was laughing because she didn't think I could go cold turkey, and I went cold turkey. And she was real impressed. And I did. The next day, that was it. No more junk food, no more nothing, And so I believe in natural remedies. I was able on my own, and with meditation as well, because I started getting into meditation, and I believe, on your own. But you got to, check with your doctor and stuff. Don't do stuff without checking with your doctor. But I was able, like they have, heart patients have what they call the ejection fraction. And when I was diagnosed, I was at like 31 on my ejection fraction, real low. Within about a year and a half, I had brought it up to 50, which is just about normal. And now I'm sitting at 52 and above, which is normal for a normal heart. It's considered in the normal range. And I did that through eating what I was supposed to eat, doing natural supplements, and meditating to calm myself down to help keep that stress off. So I believe in this stuff, and this is why it always excites me to have somebody on like Mr. Kantor. Okay, so let me get him in, and he can tell you about himself, and we'll go from there. Hello, sir.
Hello, Charlotte.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
I'm so excited about tonight. I love talking to guys to people like you.
Well, it's mutual. We'll have a good
Tell me
conversation.
about you. Tell me about you and how you got into all this.
I'm sorry, a little unclear. Say it again.
Tell me about you and how you started getting into the natural remedies and all that.
Well, I'm a I'm sorry. I began as an acupuncturist. So I did that for quite a long time, and then I decided to branch into homeopathy. Um, it enables me to treat children, and it enables me to work long distance, and it's just extremely interesting. It's actually more interesting to me than Chinese medicine because it's so psychological. It gets you prescribe remedies which are amazingly customized to a person's state. We have hundreds and hundreds of remedies, and so the challenge is always finding out exactly what matches the client. My background is in academic philosophy, and let's put it this way. Whereas I like ideas in academic philosophy, the big systems just sort of talk past each other, and they don't have that much of a not necessarily, there's usually kind of a minimal impact or reflection of the world, and that bothered me. So I was drawn to activities and studies that were philosophical, but that you could test out. So, for example, Aikido or Tai Chi, which I do a lot of, they have these philosophical ideas that you can call them propositions. That if you blend with someone's energy, or if you just enough to lead it, then you can throw the person. Well, that's not just a loosey-goosey spiritual idea. You actually can do it. You can test it out. Acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, in order to get to your acupuncture point prescription, you have to engage in what I would call a dialectical thinking, which is to say, well, you argue with yourself on which organ to blame for someone's symptoms, and you go back and forth looking at the evidence from the pulse, from the tongue, and finally say, the spleen is deficient, the liver is excessive, or something like that. The kidney is deficient, and then you make a prescription blaming one organ, and or another, and then you get to test it out by your acupuncture point prescription. If you're right, the person improves, and you also have proved your philosophical proposition.
Right.
Homeopathy relates to a part of medicine of academic philosophy that's called phenomenology. Fancy sounding word, but all it means is that you get to know somebody and you make a big effort to separate out your biases and your assumptions and sort of see them as a phenomenon in front of you. That's really quite interesting. No one can do it perfectly because it's impossible to eradicate your biases, but what you can do that's second to that would be to look at your own biases, examine your own feelings about this person. I don't like this person. There's something about him. And as opposed to saying, oh, the heck with you, say, examine that. What is that about? What is it about that person that's producing that feeling? Or conversely, I really like this person. Maybe that means I should be prescribing carcinosin or something like that. We use our own feelings. So in any case, that's also an example of using my philosophical orientation, getting to understand the phenomenon and understanding the rules that control that person. So when I make a homeopathic prescription, I'm also asking myself why this person's symptoms indicate a robotic aspect to them. There's something that they're doing automatically that they're stuck in. In homeopathy land, we call that the delusion. So also kind of a tough word. But my job is to figure out that delusion and what the rules of it are, and find the remedy, which is a dilute version of, could be a botanical or a venom of a snake or a mineral compound, that if was given in a gross amount would produce in healthy people that same delusion and the symptoms accompanying it. So you can see that's an exciting thing to do. I go to work every day. Every day I learn something new, and it really involves me in nature and the phenomenon of what it is like to be alive. It's a kind of a long answer to your question, but
No, but that's absolutely fascinating to me. It's intriguing. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
what you do. I mean, and plus it's a nice alternative for people who maybe don't want to. I hate to say it. I'm going to say it lightly, but maybe don't want to have all those chemicals put in their body, and you're able to help them with that.
Right. So that's the thing about homeopathy, and should say something about it. People are very confused about homeopathy because a couple of things. The word starts with H, and there's two other words that start with H, which these days bamboozle everybody:
Hmm.
holistic and herbs.
Right.
Well, homeopathic remedies can be made from anything. Botanicals, certainly, herbs for sure, but many of them are made for something else. Holistic. Well, yeah, homeopathy is completely holistic because the remedies are so incredibly dilute. They're just energetic. There's no possibility of putting something harmful in your body. Um, but there are a lot of things that are holistic that are not homeopathic. The other big mistake people make, and this has been this mistake has been I would say inculcated in the population, deliberate a deliberate campaign of mischaracterization by the pharmaceutical industry and other mischief makers, um, is that it's synonymous with anything gentle. No, that's not true. It means one thing and one thing only, and that's the law of similars, using like to cure like, this matching deal that I was talking about before. So when you go to a homeopath who's on his or her game, you're going to have this very extensive, very interesting interview where someone like me will start asking weird questions. So what the heck is that about? Or ask you about things that you think have nothing to do with your problem. But
Hmm.
in fact, the context in which we live. I ask questions like, "How are you famous in your family? What stories are told about you when you were a child? Um, what's your hot button? What's the situation you least like to be in? And when your hot button is pushed, what do you do? Do you get irritable? Do you withdraw? Do you get drunk? Do you write a poem? Do you slam a door?" I'll ask questions like that. I might ask a question like, "What's the worst thing that ever happened to you?" I have to get to know you really very, very well.
Hmm.
And that's the job of homeopaths. And in that first interview, which is usually an hour and a half long, we get to a place where when you leave that practitioner's office, you say, I met that guy just for 90 minutes. He knows me better than anybody I've ever met. And that gives us our baseline understanding of you. And from that point on, the prescribing gets easier once we get a handle on you.
Well, it's like anything else where stress can play a huge role into how your health goes. And is that
Stress.
the kind of thing you're looking for? Is to see what might be even minor triggers that might be causing it, right?
Right, exactly. But the word stress, we have to pull that apart and up and down and sideways. How we are stressed varies tremendously from individual to individual, which speaks to my hot button question. When your button is pushed, that means you're being stressed. But there's many ways people get stressed.
Hmm.
When I ask that question, "What's your hot button?" you wouldn't believe the answers I get. Or if I ask, "What's the worst thing about whatever let's say you come in with, like you would, maybe talk about fibromyalgia, which
Sure.
is also a word I have to deconstruct. And I'll ask a dumb question, sound like a dumb question. "What's the worst thing about that pain in your shoulders you get?"
Hmm.
And you would think the person's going to say, "You idiot, it hurts. What are you asking me that for?" But that's not what people say. They say, "I can't go to visit my mother," or I just can't play racquetball, or it keeps me awake at night, and I have these terrible dreams, or when I get incredibly irritable, and then you give any number of answers.
Hmm.
And so it just gets very specific. So the word stress is one that's a good opening word, but we have to pull it apart and see, well, what does this person mean by that? Because everybody means something different.
And stress also causes different stuff. I mean, some people get headaches, some people get upset stomachs. Sometimes, if you have a pain issue going on, it'll increase the pain, or it'll bring pain up even in different parts of the body, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, well, what I was hoping to talk about today, I'm sure we'll get
Sure,
to it, is
go for it.
I don't know how if you want to do your own introduction to it, but this book, Sane Asylums, that I wrote, which is the history of homeopathic mental hospitals, which has been suppressed. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much.
I got you.
Um, the point I'm making with this, when I talk about this now, so that people can relate to it, it's not just past history.
Hmm.
Um, I'm almost getting tired of people telling me, homeopathy saved my life. Once I got off those damn neuroleptics, those benzodiazepines, everything got better. That was poisoning me, or antipsychotics killed my mother. And homeopathy, I'll never deviate from that. That's fantastic. I hear these things, and I've been doing homeopathy for 25, 30 years, and I'm getting tired of that. And I'm wondering why something so obvious eludes the mass population. I mean, homeopathy doesn't have side effects, although we have processing effects. They're so dilute they cannot poison you. They don't create artificial conditions things that never existed, like tardive dyskinesia, or the 5 different types of bipolar disease. The United States has a horrendous record of mental illness compared to the developing countries where they haven't been exposed to our psychopharmacological regimes. So anyway, as opposed to telling, sympathizing, yeah, you're right, let's fight for this. I think we have to get at the reason for this. And one of the reasons is the suppression of history, actually hijacking of history. And this book, I hate to say it, it should not have been written by me. It should have been written by a team of professional historians. It's absolutely crazy that I did this digging and found this incredible trove of information that has been literally whitewashed from the websites of homeopathic hospitals, the websites of hospitals that were formerly homeopathic, medical schools that were formerly homeopathic. I mean, it has an amazing history, and it just was an astounding rabbit hole to go down. As a matter of fact, I mean, there's a statistic, there were 100 homeopathic hospitals in this country. There actually were many more, because a lot of places that practiced it or had a famous homeopath on staff didn't bother to say that. It wasn't so important at that time. They had their name, and they chose who they wanted. I have this piece of news in here. It's a 150-year-old journalistic coup about the widow of Abraham Lincoln, Mary Todd Lincoln. This story has not been told, but it's, if you do a little digging like I did, I mean, you will find it. But you have to have an interest in homeopathy to do this. She was cured by homeopathy, I'm absolutely certain, within 4 months. And the existing story about her, there are 2 stories about her. Each of them are preposterous, absolutely preposterous. Her son was really worried about Mary Todd Lincoln. She was spending ridiculous amounts of money. She thought their electricity was coming out of her eyes. She thought the whole city was on fire. She was completely out of her mind. And there's plenty of good reason for it. If you look at her history, she fell out of a carriage, had a brain injury. She lost 2 children. She was trolled by a vicious journalist who made a big deal that Lincoln never loved her, that she was Lincoln's second choice. She was a pariah in Washington because her family came from the South and had slaves. She had a very rough time of it. And then, of course, her husband's murdered right next to her. It's a little bit much to take. And so she did go out of her mind. There was a huge trial. It was absolutely sensational. 14 doctors testified, and many of them were homeopaths, in fact. And they said she's incurably insane. And they sent her to this particular physician in Illinois, had a little asylum called the Batavia Asylum. And I call that a Sane Asylum because something very special happened over there. And within 3.5 months, she's sitting on the front stoop, writing letters, talking to the doctor's child, being completely normal. And then a couple of months later, a couple of lawyers got involved, and she's out, and she's acting perfectly normal. And the story is, there's 2 stories. Well, one says she was never crazy in the first place. Duh! Look at the evidence of that trial. You couldn't possibly think that, the jury certainly didn't think so. They said she was incurably nuts. And the other version is that, yeah, she was crazy, but she just needed some rest and some get away from it all. And these lawyers, kind of fix things along. Both those stories, as far as I'm concerned, are ridiculous. So all I did was researched her physician, Richard Patterson, and what I found out there, you can read in the chapter, but I've not seen this told anywhere. And back to my other point, let's imagine that story came out, that she was cured by homeopathy, and it was told, and it was in children's books, and everybody knew that homeopathy could do this. What would have been the effect in 1910 when the Flexner report came out and eviscerated all the medical schools, including the homeopathy schools. I think that made a difference. If homeopathy had been entrenched in people's consciousness, that would have been resisted. People might have rose up and said, "What the hell are you doing to our medical schools?" So there are lots of examples like that, but that's a pretty spectacular one. And again, I don't see the only reason that professional historians didn't go into that territory was because homeopathy is supposed to be an embarrassment. It's supposed to be passé. It's inconvenient. Its very existence is inconvenient to the profiteering of pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
And the campaign that was waged after the Flexner Report on behalf of John D. Rockefeller's oil byproduct medicines. I don't want to get too much into a rant, but that is my point. I can tell many stories, give cases about how fantastic homeopathy is. But right now, the platform that I'm standing on is that when we lose our history, if we have our history hijacked, we lose choice. We lose freedom of choice. So when people come up to me and say, "I never heard of this before," they want to get me into a big diatribe with their doctor. I'm not interested in that so much as attacking this problem at its root cause. We need to have representation in academia of this position. We have to have historians teaching this, and having been deprived of it is really very unfortunate.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I mean, case in point right now is the thing that's going on with kratom. Where a lot of the states are outlawing kratom for the pain patients. The people, and it works for them. And that's because the big pharmaceuticals don't want it.
I couldn't catch that word. What is the word you used?
Kratom.
I don't know what that is. What is kratom?
It's I think it's, I'm not positive what it is. I know it's like a powder that they mix with water.
Yeah.
And I think it might be even from India. Somebody will probably yell at me.
Oh, I see.
But it's for pain.
Yeah.
It's not an opioid. It's nothing like an opioid at all. And that's the thing is a lot of the states are outlawing it because of big pharmaceutical.
Well, sure. Look at what happened. How long the CBD oil was held off. There's endless examples of that, and we can talk about them forever. And my humble task is just to try to repair the history around homeopathy. But there endless examples of it. One ridiculously simple example is saw palmetto, which is an herb, which all through Europe is known as the most effective substance for any kind of prostatitis. It's been documented endlessly, but it will not be prescribed in this country. Just won't. Because why? The pharmaceutical companies have drugs that they've invested a lot of money in to push through the FDA. They have to regain their profits, and they will not let doctors prescribe it. So, I mean, I'm not the first person, believe me, to say this, and many people know this, that medicine is about profit and not about care, and it can be attacked from many angles. The one I'm pushing right now is homeopathy because it's well established. It's 300 million people around the world rely on it, but in this country, the kibosh on it, the attempt, the idea of marginalizing it has been extremely successful. As a matter of fact, my book, Sane Asylums, I originally pitched it to a big overseas publisher called Springer. There may be 3 big publishers in the world that publish both academic books about homeopathy from academic and medical standpoint. Springer, Elsevier, and Team. And they used to do this. And now the campaign in Europe was so effective that they all wet their pants and said, "No, we're scared. We're not going to do this anymore." So they came up with a completely ridiculous answer to me when I promoted this, when I pitched this book to them. They said, "Well, the mental hospitals from that time, they're all like, they all practice moral care." And boy, that's like comparing a death march to a military march, saying, well, they're both about being outdoors and getting good exercise. There are enormous differences, even apart from the fact that the homeopathic ones use homeopathy and the other ones did not. There was a Middletown Hospital that I talk about here quite a bit as the mother church of this movement. It was wonderful, self-sufficient, utopian place. 47 buildings, 2,000 patients they got up to. If you were really violent and they might put you in a camisole as a very last resort. Well, 120 miles away in Utica, another so-called moral care hospital, and they had activities and they had some gardening and cultural things. And if you wanted to, you could write for the newsletter that they prided themselves on. But over there, if you acted out, Amariah Brigham, the superintendent of that place, would put you in something called the Utica crib, and that's a torture device that Edgar Allan Poe might have made up. It's this little tiny, it's it's a coffin basically made of slats, and you couldn't move at all. You just lay there and went crazy, absolutely crazy. And they used it to punish the mentally ill people, to break their spirits, and the expression "to become unhinged." Something I have a strong suspicion came from that particular device, so that when they unhinged the top, you were twice as crazy as you were when you went in, and you could not recover from that. So there's a big difference between the moral care places, and that's just another example of how when you denied information, you lose choice. If you were a family back in mid 1870s, and someone in your family had a nervous breakdown, and you had to choose between the Utica Asylum and the Middletown Asylum, you better believe it would have made a difference to you to know what those what methodologies were in those two different systems. You would have picked Middleton.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. But you do hear horror stories. You know, a lot of the stuff you hear about is the horror stories from those asylums, you know, back in those old days. So tell me this: you wrote this book, and how long did it take you to get through the research for it? I mean, this had to be incredible research.
You know, my joke is that this is how I spent my COVID vacation. I don't know how I did it, honest to God. I mean, I had a full-time practice while I did it. I mean, I'm a homeopath, so I knew some of this stuff basically, but I just started sending away from the old books, for the textbooks from the late 1800s and the early 1900s, one after another. And I'm very grateful to the University of Michigan for its digitalization process. Google Books made things available to me. It somehow fell into place. I worked like a madman. I stopped paying. I just ignored my wife. It was unfortunate. We're still married, by the way. But no, I mean, I had to steal the time to do it. It was just so compelling. It just seemed so important. You know, I feel like I had the ideas, but maybe it's more like the ideas had me. This was a story that had to be told, and maybe I was channeling the desires of some of these old homeopathic physicians. It's dedicated to Selden Talcott, who was the superintendent of the Middletown mental hospital that I venerate. But it just fell into place, and everything, the information started pouring towards me, and I couldn't resist it. And basically, I just felt I shaped it.
When you talked about Mary Lincoln's case, are there other cases like hers that where somebody made a tremendous turnaround like that without having to be heavily drugged?
Well, that's the most famous one. That's the easiest one to talk about. I'll tell you, like at the Easton Asylum in Pennsylvania, it was at that time it was incredibly well known, and very famous people went there. Actually, there's many famous people who used homeopathy, but it was like, you know, today if a celebrity disappears and they say he's suffering from exhaustion,
Right.
and shows up much later, he or she has had a mental breakdown of some sort or a drug problem, and they don't tell you where they went. You know, it's kind of embarrassing. Then they come back on make their movie. That's what happened back then. Many people would go to places like that. The homeopaths were all famous, and they protected your privacy. They weren't going to broadcast what they did. It took me. I was able to pull out. Well, this a lot of the book. A fair amount of the book is really suited to homeopaths, but most of the story is not. But if you're a homeopath and you want to find out how people practice, then what the prescriptions were. I did do a certain amount of digging around that. I do know the books that were used, and I could speculate about how Mary Todd Lincoln was treated, because again, her practitioner, he was savvy. He didn't talk about what he did. It was known that he used homeopathics, but he was a savvy operator, and he didn't want to run afoul of the conventional physicians. He was officially part of that group. So anyway, madness was also very different in that time. So if you want a war story about what was great, you might not relate to the terms that were used, but there are statistics. People suffered at that time from drunkenness, from late stage syphilis, from many kinds of dementia. The madness had different names. As a matter of fact, what I did in my book to deal with that was at the end, I created an appendix called Compendium of Madness Perspectives. And that's a complete deviation from MS, the MSD, what is it, MSD? What do they call that book? Yeah, the DSM-5. I'm sorry, the DSM-5, because it's not about labeling these things, but putting every kind of behavior into a context, whether and showing that one culture it would be a perfectly normal way to be, another one you'd be thrown into a torture pit, and so that people do not have a knee-jerk reaction to this. Thomas Szasz, the psychiatrist from the 1960s, was a paradigm for me. Having laid the groundwork for this, and he had a lot of credibility because he was a psychiatrist. What madness was, well, it was very different. And yeah, people, some of the homeopaths at the asylums, there was a lot of what I would call keynote prescribing, because when you had 150 patients there, you couldn't do exactly what I do now, which spend an hour and a half with somebody. You'd go around the wards and get a quick hit on somebody and prescribe. And they also had lots of other fantastic things going. These were wonderful places. The nurses were brilliant, and they were patient. Nobody was kicked into the community right away. It was an asylum. People could stay there for a long time. And it wasn't so important as important as it is now for me to make this case about homeopathy. Back then, yeah, everybody knew homeopathy worked. Didn't have to go on a big platform and do it. It was just the competition between the homeopaths and the doctors was economic. They knew it worked. As a matter of fact, the homeopaths at that time were wealthy. Nobody wanted to go to the conventional doctors. The homeopaths were eating the doctor's lunch, which is why the AMA was formed. But anyway, people wanted to get people well and make a living, and they didn't broadcast the news. People knew. I mean, even today, I don't advertise at all as a homeopath, and well, how come I'm busy? And people are paying out of their own pocket, and insurance is not covering it. And if you want a war story, you've got to talk to my clients, because I have to get someone's permission to talk about the cases.
Oh no, that's fine.
But
I think it's a case too where people there's no trust with big pharmaceutical anymore, because people are aware of what they're doing now, so they want to go back to a more natural thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a growing trend. Just like when I was listening to you talk about the asylums and stuff, it brought to mind these new style dementia centers that they have now. The ones where they build the whole village for them, and they get to live on their own in houses, and they have little malls they can shop in, but it's all enclosed in a facility.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, in Belgium, there's a town called Giel, Gagel, and where they have this marvelous model that had a big influence on the superintendents in Selden Talcott's day, called foster care. So, and the backstory of how that all happened at Giel is very interesting. But the people mentally disturbed go there, and they're evaluated by the town, and they're just sort of farmed out among families. And the place is full of people who are eccentric, who are minimally functional, but they're tolerated, and they're not treated. They're just except that they're treated with respect.
Right.
It's not a facility; it's the entire town of Giel.
Neat.
Yeah. By the way, back to the point about pharmaceuticals, I like to make another educational point.
Sure.
Homeopathic remedies are described in a book called Materia Medica, and I want to make the point that these are very, very honest books, especially if we compare them with the two other books. The Physician's Desk Reference, which is the dishonest book because it talks about the drugs and then is embarrassed or about the side effects. They're inconvenient. They're side effects. They're not side effects. They're the primary action of those pharmaceuticals. And on the other side is the book of toxicology, which talks about substances exclusively in terms of their harmful effects. A homeopathic Materia Medica looks at a substance as, again, it can be an herb or a botanical or a chemical compound. And, these things have been tested on healthy people. So we know the good things it does as well as the bad things. And all those things get written into appear in the Materia Medica. So if we're going to prescribe something, it might be based on something very, very trivial. A ridiculous example I make up is if people sneeze when they see a piano. I don't think there is a remedy like that, but if there was, and like a lot of people reported they have that symptom, that would get into the Materia Medica and maybe cue, a remedy that could treat multiple sclerosis for all I know. In any case, the Materia Medica is very honest. When you read the descriptions, there's things in there which are, clearly things you don't want to have, and other things that are very, very desirable, like cheerfulness or a buoyant mind, or tremendous energy, or superhuman
Right.
strength. You will see those in the materia medica, along with the other symptoms. And so we have this phenomenological idea, we're looking at someone as a phenomenon, trying to figure out what they're like in their totality. So the gold standard is prescribing on the totality of symptoms, never on the basis of one symptom.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that, you have to assume that someone's like a car and that they are the sum of all these separate little things. That's reductionist science. I often tell my clients when they want to know, what have you got for earache, or what have you got for a migraine? I say you're not a car. If you were a car, I'd take you apart, I'd take your ear off, and I'd fix it. I look at your head and find something off the shelf. That's not what's going on. I have to figure out why you have those symptoms. I have to interpret them, and I can only do that when I really know the narrative of your life and some of these things, like what sort of things affect you, and what things have affected you in your life.
Now, the stuff you get to treat people with, where did you get the information for it? Was that like passed down from like years and years ago that there have been records kept, or is there a school you go to, or how do you know how to do this?
Oh, Charlotte, what do you mean? Like my treating methods now, or the Sane Asylums book, the information in that?
The treating methods you use now.
Oh, oh, yeah, that's the entire history of homeopathy. We how medicine remedies get researched. Many of them come from existing drugs that were used, and then the diluted versions of those become homeopathic remedies. I'll tell you something. Here's something that's of note. You know the word quack? I bet you don't know where the word quack comes from. Maybe you do.
Um,
Well, I won't quiz you. The big reveal. So the other word for mercury as a substance and a medicine is quicksilver.
okay.
And quicksilver was the god of communication, which actually plays into this some ways, because people who need the remedy made from mercury are often always very good communicators. But in any case, mercury was used extensively to treat syphilis in the 19th century. And then, as in now, doctors would fall in love with some substance and use it not only for what it was supposed to be used for, but they use it off indication. They would use it for all kinds of stuff. Seizure medications today are used for depression and schizophrenia and so forth. Anyway, so mercury was used off indication for all kinds of stuff. And mercury is a terrible neurotoxin. The expression "to be mad as a hatter" comes from mercury. Erethism, another technical term, is a kind of mercury poisoning. And people got terrified of the doctors. Oh my God, you're going to that quicker. Then it was a quick, and then a quack. And the doctors were the ones who were called quacks, not the homeopaths. The homeopaths said, "Oh my God, another one of these. We've got to clean up this mess." So they make the remedy, the homeopathic version of it, diluting it from the mercury, and that's what we have to prescribe a lot of the time. So it's a supreme irony and really quite unfair that on the blogs and the internet, homeopaths are called quacks. It's quite the opposite.
Okay. The reason why I asked you is because my grandmother from Mexico was an herbalist, and she was a healer essentially, because she would use her herbs to help people who were sick and stuff. That's why I was curious to see where the stuff that you work with comes from.
It comes from everywhere, Charlotte, and herbs in Native American medicines. We are absolutely shameless. We don't care where it comes from, so long as we get to know what it does. And a lot of them have these things have incredible histories. Each one of them actually has a very fascinating history. But I'll tell you this one: the elements of the periodic table are all homeopathic remedies, and they all have interesting names. And the naming of the elements is almost as if they were named by homeopaths, because the mythical story of the Greek hero that an element on the periodic table named for, that particular hero's key issue is what is pertinent when we prescribe that particular remedy. It's just amazing. Naming is very powerful. I'll give you one example of that when you know how a remedy comes from. There's no such thing as a typical example because they're all different.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, this is a fantastic story. Maybe I'll tell you this story
Okay.
about polonium. By the way, how much time do we have? Are we okay?
Oh, we got another 30 minutes. We're good.
Okay. So polonium is an element on the periodic table. And Marie Curie was researching radium, and she discovered it. What is this stuff? She didn't really know what it was, but she was homesick at that moment. She lived in France, and she was Polish, and she said, I'm so homesick. I'm going to call it, name it after Poland. So she named it polonium after Poland. Now, note that there's an element of nostalgia in that, right? A desire to hold on to the past. Well, as it turns out, I don't think Marie Curie knew this, that polonium would be very, very valuable in the preservation of things like films, things that can capture the past. When I think about polonium, I think of the movie Sunset Boulevard, which is about that actress trying to hold on to her old past career. But listen to this. Do you remember a couple of years ago when the Soviets assassinated this man in England?
Yes.
I forget his name. Remember, they used polonium, right?
Yeah.
They used polonium. I think that's extremely interesting because that was not a coincidence. They could have used something else. Polonium is expensive. It's hard to get. Why did they use polonium? I'll tell you why they used polonium. Here's the homeopathic reason. They may not even have been aware of this. But the people who did that were the people that this diplomat was criticizing. They were the old guard of the KGB. And when he was poisoned with polonium, that was their way of saying, hey, you think we're dinosaurs. You think the past is past. Guess what? It's pretty immediate. How do you feel now? That's why they use polonium. So all these things, it's how they relate to the origin of that homeopathic remedy. Marie Curie discovering this thing she didn't really recognize or care about, feeling nostalgic at that exact moment. What a synchronicity, huh? And that's why she named it polonium. And that's the subconscious reason why that man was poisoned by that substance.
So, getting back to the sanatoriums, in your research, how much of that stuff did they use? The natural stuff did they use in those places?
Do we use today?
Yeah, or used back then too.
Well, I mean, homeopathy was at its zenith in 1875. The same remedies that we're using today, many of them were used today. We use then. We're constantly adding to the materia medica. For example, polonium did not exist then.
Right.
But arsenic and belladonna and calcaria carbonica, and nux vomica, they all were used and understood the same way then as they are now. That has not changed very much. So they each have these very specific kinds of personality features. Learning homeopathy is like getting to know a whole bunch of people intimately, like friends. The nux vomica person is somebody who's a multitasker, an irritable person. He's a control freak. Can't wait. Feels he's constantly at war with the world, and yet he says, "All I want is a little peace." You've met people like that. I can tell you the personality of these remedies because they're intimate friends. I work with them every single day. And they weren't so different back then as now. But as I said, people had different conditions. In America, drunkenness was an incredible problem. So there are books written about how to treat chronic drunkenness, which is called inebriation. But we would use the same ones, many of the same ones today, plus new ones that we need now. Our diseases are different. We have an epidemic of autoimmune diseases now. We have an epidemic of autism. We have conditions that are related to EMF, all the radiations that we're exposed to. Homeopathy has to evolve, and it does, which is continues to work because it's relevant. The law of similars is a basic law of nature, and we'll never lose it any more than we'll lose the acupuncture meridians. You can't tell people that they're phony when everybody knows that they have energy.
Do you think that the regular medical folks are ever going to accept it more? You think there's going to be more acceptance, or you think it's just going to be a back and forth?
It's a funny thing, back in the day, with my day, my head is in that time. The homeopaths, many of them, I'm not sure what percentage, they were physicians who converted to homeopathy. So there's nothing against it, but it's a tough sell because you make so much money with conventional medicine, and also starting out, you're so far in debt. You've got to make it up, and the pressures on physicians. I feel bad for them. It's horrible. They've got to work and give these 5-minute treatments based completely on protocol. Everybody complains about it, but for sure it's still happening. Quite a few physicians have converted to homeopathy that I know of. Some of my patients, and it does happen, but it's a temptation more easily given into when you're later in your career and you've saved some money and you really want to do what you really love to do. The profession as a whole, I'm not campaigning to change that. It's
Right.
got to change on its own. But the thing is, the important things always happen kind of in the background, sort of under the radar. And I'll give you an example of something. My generation created acupuncture. When I started out in the 1970s, we were called all kinds of names: voodoo doctors, medicine men, and we were made fun of in every magazine, every newspaper. We had to practice needling secretly after dark because it was illegal to put a needle into somebody. There was no licensure. We had to convince doctors to cover us in case if there's any kind of problem, if we didn't want to be completely underground. And now, 40, 50 years later, every state licenses acupuncture. People come out of Ivy League schools to become acupuncturists. I look around, I say, how this is unbelievable. This has happened. How did it happen? It did not happen because the medical establishment said, "Oh, you were right all along. This is great. Yeah, keep doing this." No, it's been resisted. It's never been fully covered. It's hardly ever covered at all by insurance, which is kind of the big litmus test of what's legitimate in this country. It proliferated because people voted with their feet. They loved it. They knew it worked. So the law of similars is also a law of nature. And by the way, 1938 and before, the FDA recognized not homeopathy but the law of similars. So here's something that I wonder if your audience knows this. If you say which of these substances has the most official credibility, nutritional supplements, herbs, vitamins, or homeopathic remedies, they might be surprised to know that of all those, the only one that is officially a drug is a homeopathic remedy. You don't have to put them through the FDA's rigorous program. And they're trying to make it seem like you do have to, one by one, but that's not the case. Back then, 80 years ago, the FDA recognized that the law of similars was a law of nature. If you can prove what a substance did to healthy people, as I say, what goes into the materia medica, it automatically meant you can use the dilute version of that to treat a sick person. And the whole class of remedies was grandfathered in as drugs. So they're funny kind of drugs because they really are only drugs constitutionally when they match the person. When they don't match, then they're not drugs. And other drugs are not like that.
Wow. I was just going to ask you a question. Oh, yes. Did you notice an uptick in your patients during COVID?
Yes, but also my existing patients were sicker. I did very well with it. No one died under my care. As a matter of fact, and the other interesting thing about the COVID was it didn't really change things that much. The word is there, of course. I know something's going on. There's definitely an epidemic. But when I would work with my clients individually, lo and behold, they still needed remedies specific to them and not much more than specific to COVID. And the whole community has been trying very hard all through this to find what's called the epidemicus generalicus, like the single remedy that would cover all of COVID. This is a very, very weird epidemic. There's so much variation, and that feeds the speculation that is not a normal type of a disease. So that's the bad news about it. But the good news is that it didn't change my prescribing. People would come in there and say, "Oh, I think I've got COVID. What have you got for COVID?" And I go through my usual thing, and I find a very specific remedy. It would work, and it would work whether they actually tested positive or not. It was still the prescription that was determined was the diagnostic criteria, not the word COVID. So people were sick; they had to go through it, and I still maintain, it's better to get your own immunity than do other sort of things. But in other epidemics, and I talk about that in this book too, the Spanish flu epidemic, cholera epidemics, homeopathy's history has been squelched. It did very, very well in those times, but that's an inconvenient truth, especially when you want to make a lot of money from people, of the fear of a pandemic.
Well, the thing with homeopathy too is that the history of it itself goes so far back that I don't see how the medical community can just wash it away. You know what I mean? Because I mean, it goes back for years and years and years. It was happening back in pioneer times and all this. So I mean, I don't see how they can do that.
Right, and there wasn't really an intention to wash it away back in the 1800s because, for one thing, none of the medicines were patented at that time. Everybody was using the same stuff, and everybody wanted some degree of control about what kind of dilutions that were used. There was a lot of overlap between the two forms of medicine. There was, in fact, a book that I reference in Sane Asylums called by David Dice Brown, The Permeation of Modern Day Medicine by Homeopathy, saying, hey, look, let the crap here. We're all doing the same thing. You're just pretending that you're inventing this all over again. Hahnemann has done this, for 100 years already. There was not any, it was not as a big a gap between the two things then, and people weren't trying to make that point so much. Everybody's trying to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
So, like what I was saying earlier on, even the conventional doctors might have been practicing a form of homeopathy from time to time. They just didn't call it that.
Right. Right. Now, when you look at the research you did on the asylums, were you able to get a kind of comparison on the success rate of somebody that was being treated with homeopathy as opposed to regular medicine?
That's a great question. I do tackle that in the book. The measures were different at that time. The asylums did their own comparisons based on death rates, and they did very well. But that doesn't even touch on the differences in the quality of life and many other things. And I have a couple of comparisons in there, not just with the Utica facility, but also in Hudson River, there was another moral care asylum. It's exactly the same size as the Middletown homeopathic one. It was opened 1 year earlier, also had all kinds of cultural activities, but it was unbelievably corrupt. It lost $1.2 million through embezzlement or misspending, and the New York Times excoriated it. They also had a baseball team like the Middletown team, and I'm glad to say the Middletown team beat them. Yeah, but it was not, how can I say it? Yeah, the standard for comparisons were not there at the time, and it was not that competitive along those lines as it is today, where homeopaths were trying to make this point. I mean, the stakes are so high because the pharmaceuticals are so harmful. Back then, it was a different time, and people had enough information that they could choose for themselves. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Well,
did. They did.
What I find so frightening right now is the pharmaceuticals, like you say, they're not safe. They're not as safe as people think they are. There's a lot of side effects with these things. And they keep, and because, like you say, there's so much money involved with it, they keep pushing it on people and pushing it on people when there's people like you that folks can go to, and it's a lot safer.
Yeah, I wish I had $10 billion. I'd create a very interesting advertising campaign for homeopathy on TV to compete with the ridiculous ads that are there. But I mean, should read. The person people should read is Robert Whitaker, who wrote a famous journalist who wrote Mad in America and Anatomy of an Epidemic, and you'll see what he does. This is not a rant. This is not the way Thomas Stas argued based on ideology. He uses all the statistics from and all the studies of the pharmaceutical industry itself, and it just proves it doesn't work. It causes at least as much harm as it does good, and it's a bad path to go down. And Whitaker is a journalist, and he's just reporting back what he found. If you collar a psychiatrist with some integrity and really ask him or her about this, he or she will say, of course that's nonsense. It doesn't work. But they can't restrain themselves from the prescribing. They're addicted to the money that they make on it, and they're not about to turn around and become homeopaths, most of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The reason why I talk about this is because I'm a chronic pain patient. So
I'm sorry, you're a what? I didn't catch that.
I'm a chronic pain patient.
Oh, yes.
So I know what's going on. I see it every time I go to the doctor. Every time I go to my pain clinic, I see what's going on.
Yeah.
And I've always looked in it. Like I was looking at Kratom for a while there to try and get away from all that. But I mean, the stuff they're prescribing, and I'll probably get taken off the air for this. You watch. I mean, there's side effects. I mean, right now, gabapentin is, there's a lawyer looking into, the side effects for gabapentin. Suboxone, people's teeth are falling out. I mean, all this stuff is going on, and people don't realize, when they're seeing a doctor, they put all their trust into that medical doctor, and sometimes even the doctors don't realize what's going on until it's too late.
Yeah. It's just so amazing to me, the trend about advertising drugs directly to the public.
Yeah.
I mean, when that first happened, there was people said, "Wait a minute, shouldn't my doctor be knowing about that? Why are you talking to me?" But now it's been normalized, and people say, "Okay, sure, my doctor is completely ignorant of this. I have to bring this to his attention or her attention. I've got to sell this to the doctor so he can give it to me."
Yeah.
It's so bizarre that the way things become normalized, that at one time were so not so tremendously abnormal.
Yes. 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 Well, I love the work you do. I think it's wonderful. I think it's a great alternative for people.
Yeah, I have a little bit of trouble with the word alternative. The Johns Hopkins University Medical School, which has been one of the exclusive sources for histories of homeopathy, is really a bad actor as far as I'm concerned, because they've been beating the drum that homeopathy was a sect, that it was a heresy, trying very hard to minimize it. Guess why? Who's funding them? And it's not an alternative. It was always quite mainstream. It was not the majority, but it was the mental hospitals, for example, were 25% of the mental hospitals. Why? How has it happened that is not mentioned in the existing texts on the history of asylums in this country or mental health care? I think the truth needs to be told, and people have to stop using words like sect and heresy, because this idea contaminates the medical history departments all around the country and the history departments. I have done an informal survey of history departments to see, where this is being taught. Am I the only person who knows about this? It would be like the only person knowing that the War of 1812 existed and trying to convince other people of that. It's ridiculous. And one thing is, well, the curriculums of the history departments are overrun now by completely other things. And not that they're bad to study gender and racism and colonialism, but there's no room for something like this. So how is that possible? It matters. As I say, if people lose their history, lose awareness of what has happened, they lose choice, and they wind up just telling war stories forever and wringing their hands. And the problem needs some creative thinking, and it needs to be come at it from different ways. So the drum that I'm beating is, let's get people who know something about homeopathy into history departments. So people who are willing to talk about history from point of view of what actually happened, and not a preferred reality manufactured by the pharmaceutical industry. Come on.
Absolutely. I want to thank you. This hour blew by. Thank you so much for coming on. I really
Charlotte, thank you very, very much for having me and hearing these opinions. I hope people talk about them and find that there's some merit in them, and find a way to improve the healthcare situation other than by telling war stories.
Absolutely. Well, we'll try to get you back on a later date too, so we can get some updates and stuff on how you're doing. All right.
Anyway, the book is Sane Asylums. It's put out by Simon & Schuster, The Success of Homeopathy Before Psychiatry Lost Its Mind. And I've gotten, surprisingly, no pushback on that subtitle. How do you like that?
There you go. All right. Well, like I said, let's get together later on down the line, and we'll talk more about this stuff.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Take care.
You have a good one. Bye-bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Okay, that was a very interesting show. I told you guys it was going to be pretty cool, pretty interesting, different from what I normally do. I want to thank him again for coming on. I really appreciate it. I will have his contact information for you at the very end here, along with he's written 3 books, including the one he was talking about tonight. But it's interesting. It's very interesting to me, because I'm always looking for natural, extra stuff, alternative stuff for what I'm going through as well. But anyway, I want to thank him again. Tomorrow night, we're shifting gears again, back to paranormal. Dr. Brian Lath is going to be with us, and he's going to be talking about the haunted reality of the paranormal. So we're going to get into that. He's done studies on paranormal and the psychology that goes into it, and it's going to get really involved and all deep tomorrow. So he's going to be on with us at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow. Look at this, I got shorter. So that I got shorter. I keep getting shorter. So he's going to be on with us at 6:30 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. All right. Again, I want to thank this gentleman for coming on tonight, and it was very informative. There's stuff I didn't even know, like about the differences in the asylums. I mean, that's crazy when they lock them up in the box. Oh my God. But yeah, and I just want to make sure, we're at the end of the show. I just want to make sure that, if you choose to to go to a practitioner like him, be sure to check with your doctor. Even though your doctor may not be for it, you might have a doctor that's for it, like I did with my cardiologist. But just be sure, you make sure that this stuff is okay. All right. I just want to make sure that's out in the open because I don't want to spread any misinformation or anything like that because that's not the goal of this show. Okay. Anyway, tomorrow again, Dr. Brian Lay is going to be with us to talk about the insides out. I'm going to say the insides out of the paranormal because that's essentially what it is. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We're good with that. I'm happy with that. Again, if you're watching from Facebook and you liked what you heard, please hit that follow button. If you're watching from YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. It's that little ghost down in the bottom right-hand corner. And if you're watching from Twitter, just join us. Join us over at Twitter. We're over at Twitter, California, Cal Haunts. YouTube, we're California Haunts. Paranormal. Let's see, Facebook, California Haunts. Instagram, I'm trying to remember all these things. I should have like a list on the wall. Instagram, Ghosty Cal. TikTok, we're California Haunts. It's all lowercase. Check us out. We're everywhere. We're all over the internet. But I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And again, I'm going to give you his information. And also, you see that ticker at the bottom? That's because California Haunts does not take money to do any investigations or anything like that. So we live off our group. Our group operates off of donations. So if you can find it in your heart to help us out a little bit, for internet costs and all that good stuff, it's very, very much appreciated because everything goes back into keeping the show on the air, buying new equipment for the team, keeping everything up, batteries, whatever we need out in the field to help people. I'd really appreciate it. And it's at paypal.me at California Haunts or Venmo/California Haunts. And I'm going to make the announcement again. I have a Psychic Development Class 2 that I put off because I ended up having some appointments for sponsors. I have one more appointment for sponsors this Saturday, and then after that, I'm free, so I will be able to get to that class for everybody that signed up. So don't worry about it. I'm on it. It's all good. All right? Okay. Anyway, I will see you guys tomorrow. Here's his contact information. And hope you guys have a good night. Website, vitalforcehealthcare.com. Sane Asylums is the book he just brought up to us. The Toxic Relationship Cure is the next book. And Interpreting Chronic Illness is the third book. And of course, you can get those at Amazon.com. Okay, once again, I will see you guys tomorrow, and hope you have a good night.